Today's story is so tense, it feels like the desert itself is holding its breath. Set deep in the American West, where red canyons cut the earth like open wounds, and the wind carries whispers older than memory, it's a place where fate and violence meet without warning. Where one wrong glance can start a war. It began with something small. A missing payroll shipment. Just a rumor. But in a land this dry, even a rumor can burn like wildfire. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The afternoon lay bleached and brittle beneath a dying sun when Slate Armadage stood alone between the wind and the town's last fragile hope. Heat shimmered off the dirt street, bending the edges of buildings and men alike, and the silence carried the tight strain of a match held just shy of flame. The riders coming in believed they had cornered nothing more than a weathered drifter, an aging hunter with dust in his beard and no reason left to fight. They had no notion he could knock a silver dollar from a crow's beak before the wings ever beat. The settlement rested in a shallow basin, cradled by jagged red canyons and the wide, pale stretch of desert flats. Its timber buildings leaned under years of hard wind and blowing grit. The air carried the dry bite of sage and sun-scorched pine. Beyond it all, the horizon cut sharp and clean, burnt orange stone against a washed-out blue sky. It was the kind of place a man could ride past without ever knowing it existed. Just a scatter of stubborn lives clinging to dust and faith. That day the sky felt heavy, the light thin and unforgiving. Far above, a hawk wheeled in slow circles, its cry swallowed by the restless wind. And that wind carried something else, a tremor, a murmur only a careful ear would catch. Slate caught it. On the far edge of the flats, dust began to coil upward, slow at first, then rising higher with every heartbeat. Not wind, horses, several, moving fast. Moments later, the sound followed, a low, rolling thunder of hooves hammering hardpan. By the time shapes cut through the heat shimmer, every eye in town had turned toward the road. They rode in like a summer storm front. Men crusted in trail dust, bandanas pulled high over their mouths, eyes shadowed beneath sun-bleached brims, rifles hung loose, shotguns rested across saddles, revolvers rode heavy at their hips. At their head sat Hollis Rourke on a tall black gelding, broad shoulders, easy posture, dangerous stillness, like a mountain lion deciding whether to strike or toy with its prey. His gaze drifted along the street with the slow confidence of a man who believed he already owned it. Doors shut, windows darkened. Lenora Finch snatched her child from the mercantile steps and vanished inside before the riders passed. The few men who stayed visible leaned against walls, hands near their belts, faces flat and guarded. Only Slate Armadage did not move. He remained where he had been, leaning against the hitching rail outside the saloon, hat tipped low to shade his eyes. His shirt matched the color of the road itself. Sleeves rolled back revealed arms corded tight as rawhide rope. In one hand, he held a fresh rabbit by its hind legs. In the other, he turned a skinning knife idly, steel flashing in the sun. The gang slowed when they reached him. Hollis Rourke studied Slate the way a man studies livestock he's thinking of buying or slaughtering. "You deaf, old-timer?" Rourke called, voice smooth as river stone but edged with contempt. "Town's closed for business." Slate lifted his eyes beneath the brim, calm, empty, measuring. "Ain't my concern what other folks decide," he said evenly, each word deliberate. A crooked smile tugged at Rourke's mouth. He let it pass. With a slight nudge of his heel, he urged his horse forward and the rest followed. They dismounted in the street, boots striking dirt, reins tied to hitching rails. Men fanned out toward the saloon and general store, voices sharp and commanding, tones that set nerves on edge like barbed wire. The batwing doors of the saloon swung wide. Whiskey and sawdust drifted into the heat. Rourke stepped inside, his crew spreading behind him. Conversation died mid-sentence. Ellery Knox froze with his fingers hovering over the piano keys. Slate entered moments later, not hurried, not hesitant. He moved like a man accustomed to standing at the edges of trouble, but each step held quiet intent. He laid the rabbit on the bar beside the knife and rested his rifle against the wall. Behind the counter, Jasper Morn shot the weapon a wary glance, as though trouble might leap from it on its own. The outlaws began barking orders. Food, whiskey, supplies. Whatever cash the townsfolk carried. Jasper poured with shaking hands, glass clinking against bottle. Tobin Carr, a wiry man with a scar dragging from ear to jaw, scooped coins from the till into his hat. Lyle Barron shoved Harlan Doss off his stool and drained the ranch hand's unfinished drink. Slate said nothing. He watched. His eyes tracked every shift in stance, every twitch of a trigger finger, every nervous glance between the men. His face never changed, but something sharp and alive burned behind his gaze. Like a hawk sighting the pulse of a rabbit from 1,000 feet up. Hollis Rourke turned from the bar and addressed the room. "We're looking for something," he said, voice carrying easy. "Word is a payroll shipment came through here a few days back. Never made it to where it was headed. Seems to me it might have taken a wrong turn." No one answered. Rourke's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We can handle this the easy way," he said softly. "Or the hard way." "The easy way," Hollis Rourke said softly. "You tell us where it's stashed. The hard way, you won't enjoy." Slate Armadage tapped his fingers once against the bar top. Just once. Rourke caught it. His pale eyes shifted. "You got something to add, old-timer?" Slate gave a mild shrug. "Just thinking that's a mighty long ride to come up empty." His voice stayed even, almost lazy. But there was steel tucked beneath it. The saloon air tightened. Even Ellery Knox's piano keys seemed to hold their breath. Rourke tilted his head, studying him like a man examining a cracked mirror. Then he flashed a grin that never warmed his face. "You always talk that slow? Or are you just plain foolish?" The corner of Slate's mouth twitched. "Reckon I just like seeing a man prove he's as mean as he claims." A couple of the gang let out low laughs before cutting them short when Rourke's gaze sliced their way. Rourke stepped forward until the toes of his boots nearly touched Slate's. His shadow swallowed Slate's stance. "Rattlesnakes get crushed in towns like this," Rourke said quietly. Slate didn't blink. "Only if they crawl where they don't belong." For a suspended second, they stood locked. Two predators measuring distance. Rourke gave a short laugh and turned away, pretending indifference. But something in his shoulders had stiffened. The loose confidence had tightened a notch. Slate reached down, slipped the rabbit into a burlap sack. The skinning knife disappeared beneath his shirt. His rifle remained by the wall, though his eyes flicked toward it. Brief, deliberate, easy to miss if you weren't looking. Outside, the wind kicked harder, rattling loose shutters. It carried the scent of coming rain, though the sky still burned bright. The town fell silent again, waiting. Slate walked toward the bat-wing doors, passing the men who had circled him moments before. Not one of them blocked his path. His boots crushed dust as he stepped back into the street. For a heartbeat, it was just him and drifting grit under the sun. He returned to the hitching rail as if he'd never left, one hand resting near the butt of his revolver. His eyes didn't roam aimlessly. They calculated. Window reflections, angles of shadow, the space between men. Every line of fire marked, every opening memorized. If any outlaw had been paying close attention, they might have noticed Slate's hand never fully left that revolver. and that he wasn't watching men. He was watching gaps. The clean lanes where a bullet would pass without hesitation. Hollis Rourke wore the smile of a man about to strike a match and toss it into dry hay. Thin, promising ruin. His eyes, cold and colorless, didn't just look at you. They assessed you, weighed you, cataloged weakness for later use. Stories of Hollis Rourke drifted across the frontier like smoke. Banks gutted in broad daylight, ranch houses burned with doors barred shut, lawmen buried shallow with boots still sticking from the earth. He sat tall in his saddle at the center of the street, one gloved hand loose on the reins, the other resting near his revolver. The gang spread out in a slow arc, boots lifting small clouds of dust. "Round 'em up," Rourke said calmly. The tone was conversational, but it carried command. 2 men shoved through the saloon doors. Another took the corner with a rifle trained down the street. A 4th strode toward the general store, waving his pistol at the last stragglers. One by one, townsfolk were pushed toward the saloon until it swelled with heat and fear. Slate stood near the doorway when Lyle Barron jerked his chin at him. "Gun!" Slate's gaze slid to Barron, then to the rifle where he'd left it. His hand rested on it a second longer than necessary. Then he picked it up, turned it once, running his fingers along the worn stock and polished trigger guard. Without hurry, he leaned it against the bar. Barron gave a short snort, disappointed there'd be no resistance. What he got instead was a nod, and the faintest smile. That smile unsettled Micah Quill. The youngest of them stood rigid, eyes too wide, fingers trembling slightly against his revolver's grip. He kept looking at Slate like he couldn't reconcile the calm with the danger. Rourke pushed through the packed room, every step deliberate. "Afternoon, folks," he drawled, voice carrying over creaking boards and shallow breaths. "Now, I don't aim to overstay my welcome. I'm just here on business." He paused, letting it settle. "I hear a payroll shipment passed through here a few days ago." He clasped his hands loosely behind his back. "Problem is, it never made it where it was headed." His eyes moved slowly across the faces in the room, resting briefly on each, searching for the smallest crack. "So that tells me," he finished quietly, "it's here. Somewhere." No one answered. In the back, Lenora Finch tightened her grip on her child's hand, pulling him close against her skirts. An older man, Thaddeus Vale, swallowed hard, his throat working like he'd choked on dust. Hollis Rourke's smile crept back, slow and cruel. "Now," Rourke said softly, "we can handle this neighborly, or we can leave you all regretting you weren't more accommodating." No one spoke. The silence pressed in, thick as smoke. Rourke's eyes slid toward Slate Armadage. You've been running those hills, haven't you? Might have noticed something out of place." Slate tipped his head a fraction. "Seen plenty. Rabbits, coyotes, wind." He paused. "Can't say I've seen payroll growing wild." A few townsfolk dared to glance up, sensing the charge in the air. Rourke's gaze sharpened. "You strike me as a clever man. Just remember, clever can turn foolish real quick when you forget who you're standing in front of." Slate's eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in calculation. He measured distance, weight distribution, the way Rourke's fingers curled easy around the grip of his revolver. For a flicker of a second, the saloon dissolved. Gunsmoke, dusk fire, men shouting across broken ground, the metallic taste of powder in the air, the steady certainty of lining up a shot on someone doing the same to you. Slate had faced worse. Men faster than Hollis Rourke, men colder, men who never saw another sunrise. "I know exactly who I'm standing in front of," Slate said at last, voice level and controlled. "Question is, do you?" The words landed sharp as a hammer cocking back. A murmur stirred, then died. Rourke stepped closer until their boots nearly touched. "You aiming to find out?" His tone had lost its drawl. Slate didn't blink. For a long moment, neither moved. The room seemed to shrink around them. Then Rourke eased back, rolling his shoulders. The smile returned, thinner now. "Stay in your lane, old man," he said quietly. "Wouldn't want you making a poor choice." He turned to his crew. "Search it. Every crate, every sack." Men scattered. Micah Quill lingered near the back, eyes flicking toward Slate again and again, caught somewhere between fear and fascination. Slate leaned against the wall, arms folding loose across his chest. On the outside, he looked carved from fence post wood. Inside, his mind was working. He tracked positions, counted exits, measured the space between bodies and doors. Rourke believed taking his rifle had pulled his fangs. He was wrong. Slate's deadliest weapon wasn't iron or lead. It was patience, and patience was something Hollis Rourke had never learned. They came for him at first light. The horizon still bruised purple and gray, dawn barely breathing. Rourke's voice cut through the cold morning. "You know this land," he said flatly. "You're leading." Slate stood in the street, sleep still clinging to his hair, cool air tugging at his coat hem. He glanced at the riders, tightening saddle cinches, checking loads, spitting into dust. Behind curtains and window frames, townsfolk watched pale and silent. Slate said nothing. He swung up onto a lean bay mare and pointed her toward the canyons. No protest, no hesitation. By the time they crested the first rise, the sun broke free of the horizon, pouring gold across the flats. Ahead, the canyons loomed like the open jaws of some ancient predator. Red rocks stacked high, shadows carved deep. The air was dry enough to split lips. Every breath tasted of stone. Hawks circled overhead, cries sharp and lonely. They rode single file through a narrow wash, hooves crunching gravel and brittle sage. Canyon walls rose on either side, tightening the world into a funnel of red and shadow. Hollis Rourke stayed close behind Slate, silent save for an occasional tongue click to his horse. The others muttered low, glancing up at the cliffs as if expecting death to tumble down from above. Slate kept an unhurried pace. Every so often he dismounted, knelt, and brushed dust aside with practiced fingers. He'd study the ground, nod faintly, then gesture toward a fork in the trail. The path he chose wound them deeper, into places where sunlight barely touched before noon and echoes warped direction. He guided them along the edge of a dry riverbed scattered with bleached cattle bones. The air cooled under rock overhangs. Slate crouched once more and swept aside a thin film of dust, revealing a faint boot print. "Couple of days old," he said evenly. "Could be your shipment passed through." Rourke leaned from his saddle, studying it. "Could be." Slate gave a loose shrug. "Hard telling. Desert doesn't give up its secrets easy." What Rourke failed to see, the print was Slate's. Left there the day before. That print had been planted the day before, during a quiet walk through the stone. Slate Armadage wasn't following a trail. He was building one. Every mile he guided them deeper, farther from the true route, threading Hollis Rourke and his men into a winding labyrinth of red rock he knew like the lines in his palm. Now and then, a bend in the canyon would tug Slate backward through memory. The wind curling through the cliffs became the whistle of artillery overhead. Hawk cries shifted into the shouts of soldiers in blue and gray. He saw himself younger, sunburned beneath a cavalry brim, long rifle steady in his hands. They had called him Crow Eye back then. He could catch movement at a mile and fire before the other man even realized he'd been spotted. Entire detachments had wandered into dry gulches because of trails Slate himself had carved into dust. Supply wagons lost in stone corridors with no way out. It had been an art, a lethal one, and he had never forgotten it. The sun climbed, pressing heat into the canyon walls until the air rippled. Sweat carved pale lines through dirt on faces. Tempers wore thin. Briggs' tallow spat into the dust. Feels like we're riding in circles. Micah Quill, still too young to hide his nerves, kept glancing back toward the open flats they'd left behind. "Shut it," Hollis Rourke snapped without turning. "We'll get there." But his eyes had narrowed. He was watching Slate more closely now. They paused beneath a shallow rock shelf for shade. Horses blew hard, flanks dark with sweat. Slate crouched near a flat stone and flipped it over, exposing a nest of scorpions that scattered into cracks. He noted it. When no one watched, he nudged a few loose stones near the trail edge. Harmless now, deadly if stepped on wrong. They pressed on, moving into tighter ground where even the wind seemed cautious. Slate slowed them under the excuse of checking sign. He led them across a narrow pass glazed with loose shale. He walked it clean. Behind him, boots slipped. Horses stumbled near the drop. Curses echoed off stone. Every so often, Slate would gesture toward a scuff mark or faint scrape along the canyon wall. "Could be wagon wheels passed through," he said lightly. Rourke ground his jaw, but said nothing. The canyon was closing around them, forcing the men closer together. The heat gnawed at their throats, worsened by the lack of water. Slate guided them past a dry basin where the earth lay cracked and split. He didn't mention the spring tucked a quarter-mile behind them, hidden in shadow. That knowledge was his alone, for now. As they rode, he began his quiet preparations. A thin tripwire stretched across a bend in the path, low enough to escape a rider's notice. A cluster of rocks loosened above a ledge, balanced just so. None of it shouted danger, but the seeds were planted. By late afternoon, shadows crept up the canyon walls like rising floodwater. The air cooled, though tempers stayed hot. Dorian Vex rode up beside Slate, his scarred cheek tight. "Where in hell are you taking us?" he muttered. "Where the trail leads," Slate answered without looking at him. Vex grunted, but there was doubt in it. Doubt was a fracture. Fractures widened. By the time they made camp, the cliffs glowed crimson and gold beneath the dying sun. Rourke ordered guards posted and the fire kept low. Slate sat apart, back against a boulder, watching thin flames lick at brittle sticks. Beyond the light, the traps waited in silence. Inside his mind, the canyon unfolded clear as a map. Every blind corner, every choke point, every ridge that offered cover. 100 ways to disappear, 12 ways to kill, all arranged with the same patient order that had carried him through war. Hollis Rourke believed he had hired a guide. What he had was a man drawing him into ground already claimed, where each stone, each gust of wind, belonged to Slate Armadage. And Slate intended to keep it that way until the snare he'd been tightening all day snapped shut. The fire burned low, orange light breathing against the dark, shadows shifting across worn faces. The desert air had cooled, though heat still seeped from stone. Slate sat apart, wrists resting loosely on his knees, eyes half closed but never unaware. Every sound went into the ledger. Boots scraping, tin cups knocking, Rourke's low growl drifting across the fire. He studied them. Rourke lounged near the flames, like a lion over fresh meat, gaze constantly moving, measuring loyalty and weakness alike. The others revealed themselves in smaller ways. Scarred knuckles flexing near knife hilts, hungry stares lingering on strips of jerky, shoulders tightening whenever Rourke's attention shifted their direction. And Slate watched, waiting. But it was Micah Quill who held Slate Armadage's attention. The boy couldn't have seen more than a handful of winters as a grown man. His hands shook when he poured coffee, metal cup rattling faint against tin. His eyes burned too bright. His jaw stayed clenched tight as wire. When he laughed, it came thin and brittle. Later, as the others drifted into their bedrolls, Micah lingered near the rim of camp, staring into the dark like he expected it to stare back. Slate rose without a sound. He crossed the dirt as lightly as if it were polished floorboards and stopped beside the boy. He said nothing at first. Silence has a way of prying words loose. "You ain't afraid of Hollis Rourke," Micah said finally, voice low. Slate kept his eyes on the pale river of stars overhead. "Fear's a choice," he answered quietly. "It'll keep you breathing, or it'll bury you." Micah swallowed. "He'll kill anyone who crosses him. I've seen it. You're not the first he's dragged out here. And yet you ride with him." It wasn't a judgment, just fact. Micah's voice cracked. "A man's gotta eat. And if you ain't with him," the boy added, "you're against him." Slate turned then, gaze steady as carved stone. "There's more than one way to survive. You just gotta live long enough to spot the right moment." He let that settle, then stepped away as though they'd spoken about nothing more than tomorrow's weather. The camp quieted. Men breathing deep, horses shifting in their tethers. Slate waited. He let the night grow heavy, let the stars slide across the black. Patience had won him wars. It would win him this. When the hour came, he moved like water slipping over rock. No sound, no wasted motion. Corvin Shaw stood watch near the horses, arms folded, head dipping with fatigue. Slate's knife slid free, catching a thin shard of moonlight. One step, two, a held breath. Steel slid beneath ribs, a muffled grunt, a brief tremor. Corvin sagged into Slate's arms before touching earth. Silent. Slate eased the body down and moved toward where his rifle lay near Rourke's gear. The wood felt familiar in his hands, worn smooth, balanced, certain. With it came a promise. He would not walk in Hollis Rourke's shadow another mile. Slate melted through camp edges, staying to the darkest seams. The horses shifted uneasily as he approached, sensing something predatory in the air. He murmured low, ran a steady hand along warm flanks. They quieted. One knot at a time, he loosened the ties. A gentle nudge, a soft slap. The first horse drifted off into darkness, hooves muffled by sand. The others followed like water breaking loose from a dam. Soon, the only thing left were empty ropes swaying in the breeze. Behind him, a man stirred, muttered in sleep. Slate froze, breath shallow, then dissolved back into shadow. By the time Hollis Rourke's eyes snapped open, some instinct dragging him from dreams, Slate was gone from the firelight. Rourke scanned the camp, missing guard, loose tethers, the distant rhythm of horses fading into the night. He rose slowly, framed by dying embers. His voice dropped low. "He ain't just a tracker." No one answered, but the tone pulled them upright. "He's playing us." From the canyon's black mouth, Slate watched realization dawn in Rourke's eyes. Not fear, not yet, but understanding. The man Rourke believed he could bend had teeth, and the hunt had changed hands. Morning came sharp. The first rifle crack split the canyon like an axe through bone. Sunlight had barely begun spilling over the jagged rims when echoes slammed against stone walls. One outlaw dropped without a cry, folding before his partner could even turn. Gun smoke drifted across dry air, bitter and unmistakable. High among the rocks, unseen, Slate adjusted his rifle. The barrel flashed once before light swallowed it. Panic ignited through the gang. Men dove flat into sand. Others sprinted for boulders, boots kicking dust. Their shouts ricocheted off the cliffs, twisting back at them like taunts. They didn't know where he was. They didn't know how many there were. And that was Slate's gift, making one rifle sound like an army. A second shot cracked. Another man spun sideways, rifle clattering into a dry wash. Above them, a hawk cried once, sharp and distant. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then chaos tore loose again. Hollis Rourke barked orders, voice raw, straining to claw back control. Two riders broke for the canyon wall, scrambling upward in hopes of getting above the shooter and pinning him down. But Slate Armadage knew these cliffs the way a wolf knows its range. He was already shifting position, weaving between boulders, boots whispering over sand and grit. Sunlight flashed briefly across his cheek before he slipped back into shadow, disappearing into the folds of stone. Every move had been considered, every sightline measured. By the time the two men reached their chosen perch, they stepped straight into the mouth of his rifle. The shot thundered at close range. One man dropped without a twitch. The second staggered, clutching his side, eyes wide in disbelief, until a follow-up round folded him into the dust. From below, Dorian Vex saw it happen. His scarred face twisted with fury. "Rourke!" he barked, then broke from cover, charging uphill with reckless rage, rifle gripped tight. Slate didn't rush. He let Dorian close the gap. Dorian reached the plateau and fired blind, bullets sparking off stone. Then Slate was gone from the ledge, reappearing to Dorian's right in a blur, rifle already slung behind his shoulder. They collided hard. Dorian swung the butt of his rifle in a savage arc. Slate caught it mid-swing. The impact jolted through his forearms, but he turned with it, wrenching the weapon free. Dorian lunged, tackling him into the canyon wall. Dust cascaded down. Boots scraped for purchase as they grappled, muscles straining. Slate moved with economy. Dorian fought with brute force. A sharp knee drove into Dorian's gut, doubling him over. But he answered with a wild hook that clipped Slate's jaw. Pain flared, quick and hot. Slate didn't hesitate. They crashed to the ground, rolling in grit. Dorian's hands clawed for Slate's throat. In one smooth, merciless motion, Slate shifted his weight, trapped Dorian's arm, and locked him into a chokehold. Dorian thrashed, curses dissolving into strangled gasps. Slate tightened, not with anger, with certainty. Seconds later, Dorian Vex lay still, dust settling over his unmoving frame. Slate rose, breath steady, eyes already sweeping the canyon. Below, Hollis Rourke stood alone. The others had fled into the stone maze, or lay silent where they fell. Rourke's breathing came sharp and uneven. Sweat streaked through grime on his face. His revolver trembled slightly in his grip as his gaze snapped from shadow to shadow. He knew now. Every step he took was being calculated, every movement anticipated. He could feel it. Cold patience pressing down from the cliffs. In the shimmering haze of heat and stone, something older than the morning took shape in Rourke's mind. Old whispers from saloons and army camps. A scout who vanished in open country. A rifleman who struck from distances that defied reason. A ghost. The next shot did not come. Silence stretched thin as wire. Rourke spun at the scrape of gravel. Nothing. Just wind. His knuckles whitened on the revolver. "Show yourself!" he shouted. The canyon threw his voice back at him. Smaller. Another heartbeat passed. Then another. Maybe he's gone, Rourke thought. Maybe he slipped away. The rifle cracked. Rourke's hat spun off his head. A clean hole punched straight through the crown. He froze. The message rang louder than thunder. "I could have ended you." High above, Slate lowered his rifle, eyes never leaving the man below. The game wasn't finished, but the ground had shifted. Now it was Hollis Rourke's fear guiding him through the canyon's deadly throat. And the echoes would carry the tale long after the dust settled. The canyon fell quiet. Morning light spilled gold across jagged ridges. Dust drifted lazily in the warming air. Rourke stood in the open, his revolver pressed hard against Micah Quill's temple, his arms cinched tight around the boy's neck. Micah's eyes were wide, darting between Slate and the steel inches from his skull. "One more step," Rourke growled, voice like gravel dragged over stone, "and I'll paint these rocks with his brains." Slate Armadage stood 20 paces away, rifle cradled steady in his hands. His face showed nothing. Wind tugged at the brim of his hat. His boots were planted firm in the dust, breathing slow, controlled. His aim wasn't fixed on the revolver. It was locked on Rourke's chest, just below the collarbone. "Let him go, Rourke," Slate said quietly. "You're out of chips." Rourke laughed, but it rang hollow. "I've got your conscience right here," Hollis Rourke rasped, tightening his arm around Micah Quill's throat. "You won't gamble with the boy. Men like you don't." And Slate Armadage fired. The rifle report split the canyon clean in two. It happened so fast Rourke didn't even flinch at first. Then his grip faltered. The revolver slipped from his hand. A dark bloom spread across his shirt where the bullet struck true. Micah fell free, hitting the dirt hard before scrambling away on shaking legs, gasping, eyes wide with stunned disbelief. Smoke curled from Slate's barrel. He did not move. He did not blink. Rourke staggered backward, mouth working as if to speak. Only a wet rattle came out. His knees buckled. He pitched forward into the dust, the canyon swallowing the dull impact. Micah stared at the body, then at Slate. Neither man spoke. After a long moment, Slate tilted his head slightly toward the open flats. "Go." Micah hesitated, words caught somewhere behind his teeth, gratitude too small for what had just been done. He found nothing to say. He turned and ran. Boots kicked up dust as he vanished around the canyon bend. Silence returned. Slate stood alone amid stone and morning light, letting the weight of it settle into the rock. Then he slung his rifle across his back, stepped past Hollis Rourke without so much as a glance, and headed for the hidden cache where the stolen payroll had been buried. By the time Slate rode back into town, the sun had climbed high. Heat shimmered above rooftops. People froze when they saw him. Their eyes moved from his weathered face to the heavy saddlebag hanging from his horse. Slate rode straight to the office of Marshal Gideon Strake. He dismounted and set the bag on the wooden step. It landed with a heavy thud. No speech, no flourish. Just the weight of stolen money returned. Townsfolk gathered slowly, murmuring. Among them stood Abram Coyle, hat in hand, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Stranger," Abram said, voice rough with feeling. "We ought to know your name." Slate studied him for a long beat. The faintest shadow of a smile touched his mouth. "Just a hunter," he replied. He turned away. Mounting up, he nudged his horse down the dirt road leading out of town. Whispers followed him. Children stood on porches, watching as he faded into the rising heat. The horizon stretched wide and endless. With each stride of his horse, his figure shrank, until only the rhythm of hooves remained. Then even that was gone. They say the canyon winds still carry the echo of that morning. The crack of a rifle, the scatter of a gang across red stone, the shot that split life from death in less than a breath. They speak of a man who could drop a rabbit before you blinked. A man who rode alone and asked nothing but the quiet satisfaction of setting things right. No one ever learned where Slate Armadage came from. No one knew where he went. But his story grew, passed from saloon to campfire, told low in twilight when the land feels older than the men standing on it. In time, it stopped being about a man at all. it became an idea. That somewhere out there rides a figure patient as stone and quick as lightning. In a country where mercy is scarce and justice scarcer still, there was once a hunter who walked straight into the jaws of wolves and left nothing behind but dust. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.